Daily, genuine love is being diminished from the world, and killings and many inhuman acts top news headlines just countries across the globe battle economic downturn. These day-to-day worries are exerting so much pressure on people that many are losing not only faith in governments, but also fast losing their minds. On this episode of Frontiers, we will take a look at the rising cases of mental illness and factors associated with it. I am Frama Hanyi, and our guest is Dr. Olusegun Soyombo, a consultant psychiatrist with the National Hospital, Abuja. Glad to have you on the program.
Thank you, Frama. Glad to be here.
We will take an excerpt to set the tone for today's discuss.
For people to optimally and efficiently deliver on tasks assigned in any sector of the economy, community, family, and workplace, mental health experts advise they must be mentally fit, as there is no life without sound mental health.
There is never a better time to speak or to prioritize mental health than now.
Because it influences how we go about life. It basically defines our existence.
And for everybody who's a working class, we know how the economy has been. It has affected a lot of working class people. So again, this is a reminder that even in the workplace, as adults, in the work that we do, that it's important to prioritize our mental health. And again, this is a reminder to say, what are you doing in your organization? What are the policies there that are focused on taking care of the well-being of your staff?
For operationalization and implementation of reforms in the health sector, key players call for increased budgetary allocation in investing and research for mental health care, prevention, and management.
The National Health Insurance is mandated to care for every citizen in the country. One of the major challenges they had was in imputing mental health conditions into and the last review, depression, anxiety disorder had been incorporated, even though we noticed that the medications for those who have the illnesses are not often covered. But a recent review actually seems to have covered most of these.
Doctor, once more, you're welcome to Frontiers.
Thank you.
Now let's get straight into the business of today. Now, what are the symptoms of mental ill health?
Well, perhaps before we talk about mental ill health, let's talk about mental health, which is the capacity for a person to cope with the normal stresses of life. One thing is certain, all of us will face one form of stress or the other for as long as we are alive. Mental health also refers to the ability of a person to contribute positively to society. So from day to day, all we do is an expression of our mental health. If we now begin to talk about mental ill health, we are talking about a very broad topic, because there are many illnesses that come under that broad umbrella of mental ill health. So you won't have one symptom that cuts across all illnesses. So perhaps we could discuss the symptoms, say, of depression, or bipolar, or schizophrenia, or ADHD, or anorexia nervosa, different illnesses. But on a general level, just to educate the public, we'll divide these symptoms into a few broad headings. Okay, so let's talk about mood symptoms. For example, mood symptoms we can broadly divide into two. On the one hand, a person's mood can be down in the gutters. The person feels sad unduly. The person is lacking in energy. The person has no interest in pleasurable activities. You can have associated symptoms, maybe like poor sleep. Either the person is not sleeping enough or is sleeping excessively. Appetite, the person may not be eating enough or maybe eating excessively. And now we are saying this not enough or excessive because a patient can experience either of those symptoms. These largely are depressive symptoms. On the other side of it, of course, in the worst case scenario, or as symptoms get worse, you have people who feel hopeless, worthless, and get to the point where they feel suicidal. They feel like there's no point living, and they begin to contemplate taking their own lives. That is one spectrum of mood symptoms. On the other side of the spectrum of mood symptoms, you have people who experience an expansive mood. So unlike the person who feels unduly sad, this person may feel unduly elated, feels on top of the world. Oh, I'm the owner of NTA. My father is the owner of the stadium. Oh, I have so trillion. The person feels elated, has a feeling of elevated self-worth. In addition, that person might feel irritable, get angry at little or no provocation at all. We said the person with a depressive symptom can feel lacking in energy. The person on this other side of the spectrum feels like he has too much energy and is doing too many things at the same time. He begins to take reckless and careless decisions, spends money anyhow, becomes disinhibited, and all that. We usually refer to this as mania. So these are mood symptoms. We also have what we call paranoid symptoms. Everybody talks about paranoia. So we have paranoid symptoms. What are paranoid symptoms? If a person just feels unsafe, a person just feels like, oh, people are after me, they want to kill me, they are monitoring me, oh, they have installed cameras in my room, they have bugged my phones. These are symptoms that shows you that a person feels quite unsafe. Oh, people are talking about me. Then people can have experiences that are unusual. For example, they can hear things or see things that other people do not hear or see. So when somebody begins to say, I can hear people in the third house talking about me, and generally we believe that maybe that place is a bit out of his or her hearing shot. The person shouldn't be able to hear what people are saying there. Or the person is here and is asking the rest of you, oh, can you hear those footsteps? Can you hear those footsteps? The soldiers are coming. You know that this person is hearing what some of us cannot hear. You see people who see things that other people do not see. And these symptoms typically will come across in our environment as spiritual symptoms, but we can explain them medically.
Okay.
There are several symptoms of different mental health conditions. I do not think that I can exhaust them all, but in the course of our discussion, if some others come up, I will say them.
Now, taking a look at our country, Nigeria, what is the current prevalence rate of this mental illness we're talking about?
Well, we say it all the time. When you talk about prevalence, well, you have asked for the current prevalence, but let's look at it two ways. There's what we call a lifetime prevalence. Okay, so generally we say lifetime prevalence will be at about 25%, which is 1 out of every 4 persons will meet the criteria for a mental health diagnosis at some point in their lives. It doesn't mean that at every point in time a quarter of the country lives with a mental health diagnosis. No, I've said it's prevalence over a lifetime. But there's what you call point prevalence. Right now, how many people have a mental health diagnosis? Typically, we'll put that at between 5 to 10%. So 1 out of 20 to 1 out of 10 persons will meet the criteria for a mental health diagnosis. Now, I always say this. That does not mean that 5% of the population will run naked or enter the market or carry stick and be pursuing people up and down. That does not represent the vast majority of mental health conditions. For example, some of the commonest conditions you'll find in some of the commonest mental health conditions you'll find will be anxiety or depressive disorders that will not manifest as somebody walking naked on the street, if you get what I mean. So I hope that answers your question.
Right, now let's compare, make a comparison of the prevalence rate now and what it was a decade ago. How would you describe what is being experienced today?
Save for a few conditions, there isn't such a sharp difference between the prevalence now and a decade ago. What we have is more awareness. We have more people, the health-seeking behavior has improved compared to what it was, say, a decade ago. We also have more treatment centers than we had a decade ago. Remember, we also have media expansion, both mainstream and social media. So there tends to be a lot more talk going on around mental health than what we had 10 years ago. It doesn't mean that we have far more cases than we had 10 years ago. But then if you look at our situation and you look at the world at large, if you look at conflicts and economic situations, you look at disease outbreaks like Ebola and COVID, these are stressful situations, and you generally tend to have a spike in the incidence of mental illnesses during such stressful situations. So it will not be a surprise that some conditions would have gone up as a result of all these adverse conditions.
Right. And let's talk about factors associated with mental illness.
Thank you for asking about factors. Most times we get asked about causes. And I always say to people that it's not quite easy to establish causality when it comes to mental health conditions. That's to say with precision that so thing caused so illness. Usually what we have are associated factors. So let us start from genetic factors. Sometimes mental illnesses may run in families. We say this very responsibly because when people want to get married, what you have is them going to do investigation. Let's go and investigate that family, whether there's madness there. What do you know that they will find when they come to investigate your own family? So we say that very responsibly. When we say that there's a tendency for it to run in families, it is not invariable. If somebody has hypertension, it doesn't mean all of his children will have hypertension. It doesn't even mean one will have. It is possible for all of them to have, just as it is possible for none of them to have it. So that somebody has a mental illness does not mean all of his or her offsprings will have a mental illness. Sometimes it skips generations. Sometimes you cannot even find any family history of a similar incidents, and that's to emphasize the point that that is not the only factor associated with the development of a mental health conditions. Of course, there are also things that happen in pregnancy, early childhood, illnesses, diseases, accidents that can happen and affect the brain that can make people more prone to developing mental illnesses later in life. Let's take road traffic accidents. Somebody gets in an accident, has a head injury, gets in a coma for some days, recovers, and the behavior has changed. That has happened as a result of trauma. Of course, socioeconomic factors also, because of adversity, can also trigger can precipitate the onset of a mental health condition. I'm sure that you have heard before of people who quote and unquote lose their minds because they were reading for one exam or the other, or because the result came out and was unfavorable, or a boyfriend has jilted a girlfriend has jilted a boyfriend. You find different forms of adversities. The point is, what breaks Mr. A may not break Mr. B, and what breaks Mr. B may not break Mr. A. But the general takeaway is that adverse conditions can be associated with the development of a mental health condition. We cannot have the discussion without talking about drug abuse. That is a major cause now of mental illnesses. So when people begin to use psychoactive substances, and what that means is mind-altering substances, drugs that people use to feel high or feel in one way or the other, and has the tendency for addiction. Some of these drugs also lead to development of frank mental health conditions aside from the addiction problem, even as it is a mental illness on its own.
Wow. Doctor, let's pause here and take a short break. You're watching Frontiers. The conversation continues in a moment. Welcome back. Now, Doctor, let's pick up from where we left it before we went on that break. how accessible, or will I say, how affordable and accessible, mental health services?
Thank you very much. Let us start with accessibility before we talk about affordability.
Okay.
The major challenge would be that the vast majority of our population live in rural areas. Most of our treatment centers, of course, are in the urban centers. But we've done a fairly decent job of trying to integrate mental health services into our primary care settings. That hasn't gone very far. There's a lot of room for improvement. But let me just say that mental health services are available in country. Every teaching hospital will have a department of psychiatry, behavioral medicine, mental health services. They may call it different names, but they will have a department responsible for providing mental health services. Many federal medical centers, many general hospitals will also have mental health services available. But like I always say, if there is an illness and people do not know where to go, they should go to the nearest hospital. Most likely, if that hospital is not able to provide the service, they will know where to refer them to. Okay, so it is available in country. Affordability. This presents a particular challenge because oftentimes people with mental illnesses have to depend on other people to fund their treatment. Say somebody has a mental illness and is not able to hold down a job, how then does he pay for his treatment? So usually they depend on other people to fund their treatment.
Okay.
However, we know that with the expansion of the health insurance scheme, many more people can have access to treatment. In the twilight of the Muhammad Buhari administration, the Mental Health Act was signed into law, and an important aspect of that law that was signed was to include provision for funding for mental health care. Of course, implementation is still at the rudimentary stages, but it's a major victory that that act was signed into law, and we know that statutorily there will be money set aside to fund the treatment of mental health conditions. What I always say to people, health is wealth. We can wait for government, but we can't always wait for government. Individuals too can take the initiative, purchase for yourself health insurance so that if there is need, you have treatment, and we can begin to give health insurance as gifts to people. Those who are wealthy, those who are not necessarily wealthy, but if you feel like giving something back to society, perhaps health insurance is something you can consider. You pay a token for somebody and the person has access to treatment for an entire year, not just for mental health conditions, but for any condition. We talked about accessibility first and we came to affordability. We'll go back to accessibility because one major component of accessibility is the health workforce.
Okay.
We are bleeding. We are hemorrhaging doctors, nurses, psychologists across the country. Our professionals are leaving. It's Japa season. Everybody is running away. So even if the hospital is there, are they adequately manned? Do we have adequate manpower to provide the services? The answer to that will be an emphatic no. So we have to think of how to retain our people, how to train more people so that Nigerian citizens can have access to treatment in these places. I
was coming to that question, but I'll still ask anyway because I was going to ask you, what are the gaps, if there are, in healthcare delivery in Nigeria? And can you let us into what they are?
So in fact, there is something called treatment gap. And it applies not only to Nigeria, but all over the world. And when it comes to mental health, the treatment gap is very high. Even in the advanced countries, treatment gap can be as high as 50%. And what does that mean? That up to 50% of those who need access to mental health care do not have access for one reason or the other. Either the service is too far from them, or it's unaffordable, or they do not have adequate manpower for them to see the doctor. So that is one aspect. So here in Nigeria, that treatment gap is as high as 85%.
Wow.
Sometimes it's as high as that for several reasons, including wrong attribution. Because if somebody has a mental illness and the people around him think that he has a spiritual problem, then they won't take him to hospital, isn't it? They will likely take him elsewhere. So that's part of the gap. That's part of what contributes to the gap in treatment or in access to healthcare. So I think that we've answered that question from the last question, talking about geographical accessibility, financial accessibility, manpower accessibility, and then I mean that answers it. Yeah.
Now, there is a lot of cultural, and traditional belief, as well as stigmatization against persons with mental disorders. Now, what can be done by government, non-governmental organizations, people in general, to look into this impediment?
Maybe before we talk about what can be done, let's talk about those beliefs, those myths. We hear different things. If a madman bites you, you run mad. What is your hand or body doing near the mouth of somebody that is not well? But it is not true. Mental illnesses are not transferable or transmissible by bite. Okay, it's not like rabies, that an unvaccinated dog bites somebody and the person has rabies. That is not true. So mental illnesses can also not be transferred merely by sharing utensils or sharing the same space, living in the same house. It doesn't work that way. Now we've talked about different types of mental illnesses. Let's seize this opportunity to mention certain illnesses peculiar to women relating to childbirth, because you've heard of things like postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, postpartum blues. The woman cannot transfer that illness to her baby by breastfeeding. So having that mental illness is not a reason not to allow the woman breastfeed a baby. The decision on breastfeeding is strictly a decision based on risk assessment. Is there any risk of harm to the baby? And once there's enough supervision, we can continue to allow bonding. The important thing is that that woman should be receiving treatment for her condition. There's also the myth that mentally ill people are always violent and aggressive towards others. Again, that is not true. The vast majority of people who have mental illnesses will not attack anyone. There are certain illnesses that can make people prone to violence because they feel threatened, they feel like people want to harm them, and when people invade their space, they can be severely threatened and feel like the only way is to act back. Or illnesses where people hear voices and receive instructions that push them towards violence. Again, if these people are treated, those illnesses will not get that severe. On the contrary, the mentally ill person is more likely to be a victim of abuse. I am sure that we have all seen the so-called, quote and unquote again, mad woman, and I hope that you and those who are listening to us will stop using the terminology mad. But we have seen that woman on the street who is a vagrant but is pregnant. Who got her pregnant? That is sexual abuse. Somebody went and took advantage of a vulnerable, mentally ill person and got her pregnant. We also know that these people can be taken and used for ritual. They are victims of ritual killings and all sorts of abuse. So anyway, the point is that the vast majority of people with mental illnesses will not physically attack anybody. So what can we do to disabuse the minds of our people? This is one of them, providing a platform for us to talk about it. We need to constantly educate the citizens so that these misconceptions are not carried.
Dr. Olusegun Soyombo, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's really been interesting and insightful talking to you.
Thank you, Frama, for having me.
Welcome. We have been looking at the rising cases of mental illness and factors associated with it. Our guest has been Dr. Olusegun Soyombo, a consultant psychiatrist with National Hospital, Abuja. I am Frama Panyi. Thanks for watching. Agriculture is the backbone of Nigeria's economy and Africa as a whole, employing millions of people and contributing significantly to the continent's gross domestic product. However, despite its potential, the agricultural sector faces numerous challenges, ranging from low productivity, limited access to finance and markets, and inadequate infrastructure. Nigeria, with its vast agricultural resources, is well positioned to lead the way in unlocking Africa's agricultural potential with the necessary backing from the government. This is the focus on this episode of Frontiers with Dr. Canisius Kanangire, Executive Director, Africa Agricultural Technology Foundation, AATF. Glad to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much.
We will get into the business of the day after this excerpt.
Information technology, including artificial intelligence in extension service, could serve millions of farmers without hindrance. This has led to the introduction of the National Electronic Extension Platform unveiled by the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security.
Farmers need information, real time, all the time, and in different format and in different language. So realizing that, we came up with how to make a digital platform.
By leveraging cutting-edge technology and the use of tools to bridge the gap between research and practice, we move decisively towards an era where extension services transcends physical barriers and limitations.
The platform is designed to serve 5 million farmers as well as thousands of other extension service providers.
Once again, we're glad to have you join us on Frontiers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now let's get straight into the business of the day. What are some of the promising areas for investment in agriculture in Nigeria?
There are many promising areas in agriculture to invest in. You can invest in production, and that will require that you invest in technology product which can increase productivity and protect the crops that you want to produce against, for example, the insects and other pests, or provide tolerance to droughts, which means that you will be shielded and more resilient than the farmer who uses technologies which are not improved and adapted. This is one. But you can also invest in processing, value addition, and that will first allow you to reduce the losses that we normally have on each produce, on agricultural produce in Africa. We lose almost 40% of what we produce to rotting and some waste and what. So 40% is lost. But if you make a proper processing and value addition, then you will get more money and you will use almost all the produce. But the value chain is very varied, I would say, because you can also invest in technologies like communication, allowing people to know where the market is, allowing people to use very novel technology like AI to know how to do precision agriculture and reduce the, I would call it, waste of money in, for example, fertilizing where it is not required. Some time when we are applying fertilizers, they tell you put NPK, but you are putting nitrogen probably in a soil which does not require that. So precision agriculture will allow you to put nitrogen where it is required, potassium where it is required, etc., and water, etc. So to approach the optimal need of the crop, and with that you reduce the expenditures on it, the cost of production, and you produce more because you are close to the optimal situation. So you can invest in all those areas. And this is my call every time to the youth, because working in agriculture does not mean you take a hoe and you start cultivating. No, it can be you take your computer, your phone, you code what is needed by a farmer, or you take a tractor or other machinery. Now we have a variety of them adapted to the size of your farm, planting, plowing, harvesting, processing, all those.
How can investors capitalize on the growing demand for agricultural products?
Currently, you can do it in a way that can allow you to have a higher level of predictability on your yield. And we know that if you have that predictability, then you can do your projection of the cash flow and predict how much money you will even have as a profit. So investing in agriculture, but with the support of science, technology and innovation coming in, I think it gives the assurance for whoever invests to get back his money. So I would say every area of our life has known some sort of improvement using science, technology and innovation. Agriculture should not remain at the back of all the other activities, and yet the role of agriculture is higher than even others. You can't live without eating. You can't be happy without having food. Food and nutritious food for the matter. So you need all that, and investing in all those is very crucial. Currently, I'm seeing many investors in agriculture coming for fortification, to add some minerals to the flour so that, for example, children can have more nutritious food for them. It is, on the other hand, but it is part of that agriculture, and it is very lucrative. So I think one interested in this area need to look into the value chain from production to consumption, and then situate the level where the investment could be done.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned a certain percentage of loss, in agriculture. No doubt there are challenges leading to these losses. What are some of these setbacks, and how can these setbacks be addressed?
Oh, the challenges leading to these losses are many. Let's start with first using hand and the hoe when you are harvesting. For example, imagine you are harvesting cassava or potato with the hoe. You will cut some of them. When they are cut into pieces, then they are no longer good, very good for consumption after a couple of days. They will be the one rotting very quickly. So the use of specific mechanization will certainly reduce those losses by improving the quality of the harvest. This is one. The second is to have the infrastructure which is needed to take the produces from the producer to the consumer, like business centers where you have people who will buy and consume them. Most of the time, rural area is not very well connected to the cities and those centers where people are, where consumers are. Roads need to be improved. You have a problem with conservation. Look at vegetable, for example. You harvest cabbages in tons. If they are not bought and consumed, after 2 days, you have already lost half of that production. So you need a cool room where you can put them as you wait for the consumers to come. And you go ahead. Cassava, the value chain of cassava. If you don't peel them and process them immediately, again you will have that problem of value addition, conservation, and then marketing. So because of that, we have been facing losses from the field when we are harvesting. losses, big losses between the field and the consumer's location. And then the shelf time of many product is very low, and because of that there will be a lot of losses, because our governments and our private sector have not invested enough into those facilities which are meant to conserve and protect the harvests. In Africa and in other developing countries, waste is limited. This is the food which remain on your plate when you are eating. Most of the time in developing countries, you don't have enough of food to live on your plate. So you will face that kind of waste of food in developed countries when they have too much of it. So my call has been, and it is today, that we need absolutely to invest into that. And we encourage our government to do the needful in having the infrastructure and in having the facility to conserve, so that produces are not contaminated, are not degraded by insects. We have some, for example, the brookid. If you put the beans that we love here in a hot environment like our normal weather, then they will be poked by those brookids. So you need to protect the harvest so that people can eat them in good condition, and the nutrition depend on that good conservation.
Okay. Now, how can governments create enabling environment for agricultural investment and growth, especially as the government is encouraging youth to go into agriculture?
I think that there are many ways the government can encourage investment in that area by creating policies and regulations which are conducive for those investors to come in agriculture. But also we have the government which could invest in the basic infrastructure. I will take examples now of some countries that have invested in agricultural hubs, where you will have, for example, the silos, where people producing grain will come. It is like a bank of grain.
Okay.
It is built by the government. And then you produce 15 tons of maize, you bring them there, they register, Madam X has brought 15. So they keep it for you. And when the market will be available, you just go there. You say, okay, my 15 tons, I want to sell them. You will pay a fee for that conservation, and it is a low fee. So that is something which allowed people not to be taken ransom by the buyers who want to buy at a very low price during the harvesting period, and also to sell good product on the right time.
So we'll pause here and take a short break.
Thank you.
This is Frontiers, and we're taking a look at investing in agriculture for economic growth. The conversation continues in a moment. Welcome back. Now, before we went on that break, we were talking about enabling environment, for agricultural investment and growth. Now, what role can public-private partnerships play in promoting agricultural development?
The government cannot do everything. The private sector cannot do everything. The government will put in place policies, will put regulatory framework, will put institutions that will support the private sector in ensuring that you put your money there, but we can provide you, for example, with stewardship, with knowledge, with extension services, etc., etc. And then we will help you get those very costly infrastructure. Those are the government thing. But now the private sector need to be encouraged if you invest in this area, you will get ABCD facilitation. So, and we scientists, we need to also show the private sector this area is not dumping money in a bottomless pit. No, agriculture is an area where you can invest and get your money. We have still a problem because most of our farmers are smallholder farmers, where they are operating on 1 hectare or 5 hectares. That is small. You can't make big money. But in countries where they work on 2,000 hectares, for example, they make money. I have seen many farmers with private jets and what, when they come to meeting, not far from here in South Africa, for example.
Now let's talk about sustainable agricultural practices. You know, what are some of these practices that can be sustainable to mitigate the impact of climate change on agriculture?
I would say from AATF, our way is first to start with breeding. You breed varieties which can be drought resistant. Okay. The problem we have is mainly drought. So those which are drought resistant will certainly give you good result even in very harsh weather when there is scarcity of rain. That is one. But also the way you cultivate, the way you mix the crops can come in as a way to resist the impact of climate change. Currently we are talking, and we work on it at a certain extent, of conservative agriculture, where you say, okay, I will mulch my field. You take all the rest of the crop when you harvest, and you put them down there so that you protect the soil against the harsh sun. And that mulching will allow you to keep water close to the roots. That is one of the way. And currently in conservative agriculture, they are promoting planting without tilling. You don't degrade the soil. You just remove a bit of soil. You put your seed, and then it grows. You just manage the weeds just nearby. And since you have a good combination of vegetation within there, you don't get that ravage which is caused by the weed. So conservative agriculture is one. Breeding and our centers, National Agricultural Research Center, are very good of it. Even global one like IITA, okay, they are producing varieties. We have produced many varieties of maize, of rice, and etc., and adapted to all those harsh conditions. And you can also use biotechnology to even give more power to the varieties you have produced to resist the harsh of the climate conditions. We have, for example, telomeres, which resists the drought, okay, but also resists insects like the stem borer, the fall armyworm, which becomes very tough and harsher when there is drought.
Now, what are some strategies that can be employed, to empower smallholder farmers in Africa, particularly youth and women?
First, they need to get the knowledge. The knowledge of the availability of the technologies and technologies which can be applied at their scale without investing so much money, because most of the time they don't have it. But those technologies can be applied on those small sizes of land. I will give you some examples. So, for example, mechanization is very important, okay, to reduce the hurdles that women and children and youth in general go through. So we have created a mechanization company in the southern part of Nigeria. We started with cassava value chain. And these tractors, harvesters, planters, boom to put herbicide, they are available to the smallholder farmers on a very affordable price, because not everyone will be able to pay those machines. But if you buy them and put a price which is not very high, then it is accessible to them. That is one. The youth, I said, need the youth, women. When we visited some regions, again in the south, you find that girls, mostly girls and their moms, are peeling the cassava because they want to do the gari. It is cumbersome. So what we did is we made consumption. We conceived a machine where the root can be taken from the field and put in a machine, and then they are washed, chopped, dried, processed up to when you have the flour for consumption of human being, and the rest is given to animals. The youth need a special attention in our continent, and on this we are thinking of an innovation hub, youth innovation hub.
Okay.
And this is an innovation center where the youth can come and learn about all these technologies by seeing. I see this is how you do it, this is how you do it, this is how you do it. And they can have like an internship or attachment to these companies. But they see from the hub, they get the skills, and then they are skilled also in softer skills. How do you create your own enterprise? And with this, we hope that it can create many jobs and profitable jobs for the youth. Okay. Otherwise, they are reluctant to take agriculture.
Now, briefly, Doctor, how can Nigeria and other African countries improve regional trade and market access for these agricultural products?
We have regional economic blocks. They have policies. The implementation of those policies still need to be improved, because sometimes you will see the neighbors wrangles between themselves on this produce, on maize, don't export, on that, we don't take this from this country.
Yeah.
That is very unfortunate. But Africa will not be food secure if we don't open our borders and allow those who produce more than they can consume to sell to the neighbors, and vice versa, because you can produce more tomato, I produce more beans, and then we exchange, and we are okay on both sides. When I go to Ghana, what I get in Nigeria, is it good? What comes from Burkina Faso to some part of this country or Ghana, is it good? Can we harmonize our policies so that we open our doors to do something? If we do that, we'll be all prosperous, and we will be able to be successful in our fight against food insecurity.
Doctor, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Frontiers. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
On this edition of Frontiers, we have been taking a look at investments in agriculture for economic growth. Thanks for your time. I am Frama Panyi. In today's fast-paced world, people are constantly bombarded with diverse pressures that can threaten mental stability, from the work demands and the complexities of relationships and financial stress, and this leaves many feeling overwhelmed and lost. However, mental experts say maintaining mental stability amidst these pressures is crucial for any individual's overall well-being. It is only when an individual is mentally stable that one is better equipped to handle life's challenges, make rational decisions, and cultivate meaningful relationships. And so, on this episode of Frontiers, we shall be taking a look at finding calm in the storm, maintaining mental stability amidst diverse pressures. I am Frama Panyi. Thanks for joining us. Our guest is Michelle Simon-Safo, a mental health practitioner and has been managing mental health services in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom for 22 years. She is also involved in politics as she is at present an elected Labour councillor in Haringey, Tottenham, United Kingdom. So glad to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be invited and a privilege to be able to attend.
You're
so
welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to NTA International.
Thank you.
The program continues after this excerpt.
Man is controlled by emotions which are stirred up by situations or the circumstances an individual finds him or herself. Over the years, and most specifically in recent times, economies of the world have been witnessing economic downturn, which has brought about high inflation rates coupled with the effects of climate change on food, land resources, and security. These factors have made life so difficult for many, as the gap between the rich and the poor keeps widening with each passing day. This has in turn left many unsatisfied, hurting and bitter, thereby affecting people's mental state as well as interpersonal relationships. Research shows that when an individual is happy, some hormones are released into one's system.
When you are medically ill or physically ill, but because you are in the right state of mind, right state of thought, your recovery process becomes so easier. You know, when you are depressed, when somebody is not happy and it happens you are coming down with depression, the immune system is affected.
Just as being happy produces good hormones, sadness also releases hormones that affect an individual's well-being.
Let's get straight into the business of the day.
Yes.
Now, what are some common symptoms, common signs of mental instability?
Mental instability is a very broad term, but if you look in the English dictionary for mental illness, it just says disease of the mind.
Okay.
Now, disease of the mind, there's many different domains of what mental illness is. So you can have a psychotic illness, you can have clinical depression, or you can have anxiety. There is a thing we call, when we're doing an assessment, it's a mental state examination, if somebody has been referred into mental health services. So the symptoms and the signs of mental illness vary according to what your condition is at the time. So for example, if you have clinical depression, you might become isolated, withdrawn, not wanting to eat any food, disassociating yourself from any of the hobbies that you once did, withdrawing from family members, finding it difficult to get up, being lots of sleep and staying in. So you withdraw quite dramatically. If you've got a condition like anxiety, your stress levels will then become out of proportion. You won't be able to manage things. Your cortisol levels in your body become quite heightened. Little things that were, would be insignificant to an ordinary person who's not experiencing mental ill health becomes quite amplified. So therefore, a little thing like dropping a pen can take you from 1 to 100.
Wow.
Or if you've got a perception of something that's going on, you can become quite agitated about it, when the normal person around you who isn't experiencing mental ill health will be able to manage that. So you have inability to contain your feelings and your thoughts. Then you have other kinds of illness like psychosis.
Okay.
Psychotic illnesses are under the umbrella of perhaps schizophrenia, bipolar affective disorder. Those illnesses are intrusive thoughts. You can have voices, you can have auditory hallucinations, you can have visual hallucinations as well, but it's actually seeing things which are not there, and you think that they are real. You can believe that somebody, for example, on the frontiers, someone might be experiencing a psychotic illness, schizophrenia at home, and they will think that we are talking about them.
Wow.
And it is a real thing for them. And those things are managed from a variety of different ways to be able to manage mental illness. Mental illness within the black community in England is still very much a taboo. And you know, when we go on and talk about that later, I'll be able to expand on those aspects of it.
Right. Now, looking at the society today and everyday life, there are so many problems in the world, too many things to worry about. Now, how can an individual develop resilience or adjust to cope with these diverse pressures, you know, such as work pressure, family, relationships, and all that?
I think it's really important for self-care.
Okay.
Self-interest governs the world. And, you know, we have a saying in the Caribbean that an empty sack cannot stand. You have to be able to build self-resilience by having self-awareness and having emotional intelligence about yourself and your capacity to be able to cope. It's really important, I mean, across the globe, that people have rest and recuperation. So there are things inbuilt when you are working that you have annual leave. Those are breaks that you have to have. And even in England, when you are working, the trade unions insisted that people have breaks during the day. So you'll have your lunch break, you'll have a break to have a cup of tea. Otherwise, you become overloaded. So in regards to work, that's one aspect of having breaks. Keeping your hobbies alive, because not every job that you do, you really enjoy it. So there has to be an element of joy in your life and something to look forward to, a hope that you can hold on to. When the going gets rough, you hold on to those really positive thoughts that keeps you going through. In regards to families, they are very complex, you know, and it's about giving people the permission to fail and actually giving yourself the permission to fail. You know, the Bible teaches us, I'm a Christian, the arms of flesh shall fail you, you dare not trust your own. Yeah. So it's not putting people on a perfect pedestal. So if they disappoint you, it doesn't feel like a crushing trauma.
Basically cutting short the expectations.
That's right.
Okay.
Minimizing your expectations of what you expect from the different family members around you, because society has an ideal, but that person's capacity, they might not be able to deliver that to you. There is very much a patriarchal society, which is in Africa, which I've observed, and it is in England as well, where I'm from, where the gender roles are quite profound. So it's the wife's expectation of her husband to be the ultimate provider, and her to be able to relax at home. And sometimes wives do not want to be at home. They want to go out and work, and the husband wants them to. So that's another tension and a dynamic which has to be worked through. I would say before you hold a grudge, hold a conversation. So have a conversation with that person within your family. Try and unpick what are the main gripes that they have, and you collectively do that together. When I did my master's degree in social work, I felt that the beauty of Africa is that they have group determination and not self-determination. In the West, we have self-determination. If something happens, you think, how am I going to cope? But in Africa, if something happens, my husband's from Ghana, if somebody dies within the family, the whole family come together and figure out how that happens. When I was doing my first degree, my master's degree, there was a concept of self-determination and group determination, and the concept was the group took precedence and the self receded. So there's many different mechanisms, but I would say overall, manage your expectations of what you expect from your family members. Take good breaks, have self-care, have mindfulness, and think good thoughts about yourself. Give yourself permission to fail. Yeah.
You're an expert in this field, right? Now, what are some effective, practical stress management techniques you could recommend that can be incorporated into daily living, to help cope and manage with this stress?
Okay, as you say, stress comes, whether you want it or not. You could be at work and your manager says something to upset you, and then instead of to be triggered, you have to have an ability to contain yourself. So number one, it's about reading the room, reading what is going on around you, so you know where the pitch is. It's having self-awareness as well, recognizing what your impact is on others, realizing that you are in tandem one with another with people. So in regards to how you control yourself and how you provide containment, there's a thing that we call mindfulness. Mindfulness is about putting a negative thought, a positive thought on top of negative thought. There's also a thing we use called the cognitive behavioral therapeutic approach. And in loose terms, what that means is you are replacing, if you have self-persecutory thoughts to say, I'm a failure, I can't make it, I can't do this. You put that with positive thoughts. You think of a time when you have achieved something that you have attained, what the outcome was and how pleasurable that was. So when you have that thought, the self-destructive thought that comes in, you replace it with a positive thought, and that kind of helps to balance and gives you more joy and euphoria and all those things, the things that go around in your body that give you joy. And this is nothing new. As a Christian, there's parts of the Bible that says, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are of a good report, think on these things. And in all the Abrahamic, even in Islam, there are quotes within the Quran which teaches the people about mindfulness. Faith is very important. We know that the statistics and the data from England say that people who have a faith tend not to commit suicide. Suicide is a real thing. When people feel so overwhelmed with pain and depression, or even psychosis, which will give them command hallucinations, they tend to have self-harming behaviors. So one of the good things is to purify your mind, to think good thoughts, to have rest and breaks, be mindful and set boundaries as well. That's very, very important, to set boundaries on what you expose your things to. So I would say to people to be careful about the places you expose yourself to be mindful and be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. That's one of the best things that you can do to preserve your emotional well-being.
Basically, you have to let your mind be full or filled with positive thoughts.
Yes.
All right. Now, we just spoke about a few minutes ago about complex family issues and how to deal with family. We in Africa, we have this culture, you can't talk back at your elders, even if you're on your right. So what are some strategies navigating such issues when you're in a home, family issues, to maintain this mental balance? You're on your right, you're trying to talk to parents or elderly ones. How do you navigate that?
In Africa, it takes a village. It takes a village. And there's so many unspoken heroes in that village. And I would suggest that if you know you haven't got agency to be able to be bold to speak to your parents or an elder, then you find somebody, whether it's a grandmother, an aunt, even somebody within your faith group, you're able to speak to them and ask them to support you to be able to speak to that person that's causing you any form of distress. That is one of the best ways, I would say. Even my children, when they're at school, And I say, if they're finding it difficult with a teacher, and as you say, they can't just boldly go to the teacher, they have mentors within the school that they're able to go to, and that mentor will then facilitate the conversation that they can have with the teacher. Or if it's somebody within the family who is the person, the head of the family, that they can be able to go to and speak to. Or if you're in a two-parent household, and it's your father that is, that you find that you can't talk to, maybe you can talk to your mother, and your mother will be able to bridge that gap. But I always say, before you hold a grudge, hold a conversation, because the conversation is what opens up, and it gives the two perspectives which can be balanced. So I do know that, and I think that parents within Africa need to be more liberal in their mind thinking and allow their children to be able to approach them. Times have moved on, and if you do not have that influence in your child, outside will influence it, social media will influence it. True. And be able to read them as well, because not everything they're going to tell you verbally. So it's a two-way street.
Right, let's pause here and take a short break. You're watching Frontiers. The conversation continues in a moment. Now, before we went on that break, we were talking about complexities, family issues and all that. Now, you mentioned something about social media influencing the kids if the parents does not step in. Now, social media is increasingly becoming a part and parcel of our everyday life. What is its impact on mental health?
Social media has its positives, but it also has great negatives. There is, there is, social media is not always real. It's not transparent, it's not candid, and people are projecting a lifestyle that others are aspiring to, which they see on social media, which is not real. And they get themselves into a lot of debt. They project a false narrative of what they are, and projecting that false narrative of who they are and what they are can leave them quite damaged inside, because there is an authenticity in who you are and what you're giving to the world. It has a real grave influence on young people. We have seen in London young people take their own lives through bullying, harassment and intimidation over on social media. It's a big problem where we're going to have to, well, the government has intervened in regards to monitoring it. You can put embargoes on your children in relation to how much social media they're going to be exposed to. I have children, when my children were younger, there was locks on different television programs. I wouldn't allow them to watch it, because your mind is very malleable at a very young age, and the things that you think are real are quite fake. They've even got a slogan amongst the youth, fake it till you make it, but in actual fact, along that journey of faking it, you're creating damage for yourself and damage for other people. There's nothing better than to thine own self be true. Social media has its benefits, but it also has many deficits, and many deficits towards young people. I've seen in Africa the beauty of certain parts and the Caribbean, which hasn't been so overtaken with social media, so their authentic lifestyle remains intact.
Talking about self-care, we had mentioned that earlier, how important it is. Do you think people in today's world prioritize self-care and make time for activities that promote relaxation and stress relief?
People don't. They're on a treadmill, a hamster wheel. They keep on going. They're always chasing the next pound. They are aligned to more material aspirations. They don't do enough self-care. Now, I see the generation below me, myself, I'm a grandmother and mother. I see them now taking that as a priority
to looking after self-care. So they would have rest and recuperation. They would have holidays. They'll have weekend breaks. They'll go for massages. You know, the men, I've even seen men when I'm doing my nails getting themselves having a pedicure or getting their nails done and having some relaxation, the younger men. But I don't think it's done enough. I think that when I'm talking for myself, being a black woman and being in England, I think when your whole life is about providing for your children, you tend to put any form of self-care on the back burner. Which in a while, my white counterparts who have inherited wealth, who have more privilege, they are more inclined, and they do go on more holidays, have more massages, and enjoy the more pleasurable things of life, which in a while we and people who are marginalized in communities, they fight for survival is to get better housing, to put food on the table, and to look after their offspring.
All right. Now, what are some concrete steps, to take, to prioritize mental health and well-being?
You have to be intentional. You have to be so intentional about doing that. So it's almost like getting up and saying, on a Saturday, I am going to not do anything for anybody else. I'm going to read a book. That's my hobby, and I'm going to put some time aside to be able to do that. There's also things that you can do. If you're in mental distress, you can go and get therapy, counseling.
And that's self-care too.
Of course. Therapeutic intervention is self-care, and there's no shame in it. Because you go to a therapist, you can use psychodynamic therapy, you can have counseling, you can have cognitive behavioral therapy. A thing we have in England called instant access to therapies. It's called IAPT. And it's in every borough. It's a strategic development because the mental health of a nation is important, because that is the founding, basis for which by you can build on. If you're mentally unstable, what can you do? So therapeutic interventions is important as well, and it is part of self-care. People generally, I myself build mindfulness into my day, deep breathing exercises, having time outside. I ensure that I do get a lunch break. I might go for a walk during the lunch break. If there's a park across the road, have a good conversation and a laugh with my friends, build joy into it. If you want to read a podcast, do that. Be active and also generate your own talents and what they are. I can't tell you what they are. You can't tell me what mine are, but the things that create joy and happiness for you. That's part of mental well-being.
All right, and these are steps people can adopt in their daily life to help keeping themselves sane.
Definitely.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the program. I wish we could go on, but time is not on our side. Thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on Frontiers and sharing your thoughts with us and teaching us how to keep sane in this very busy, everyday routine life of ours.
Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all the best. And Nigeria, keep well, keep safe, and keep mentally on top of yourselves.
We will. Thank you. We have been speaking with Michelle Simmons-Sappho, a mental health practitioner and elected Labour councillor in Haringey, Tottenham, United Kingdom. Remember, mental stability is within reach. Let's take the first step towards making ourselves healthier and happier. Bye for now.